Hey, besties. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am getting started on time ish. But first, I have to figure out how to get this man's chart on the live. But in the meantime, hi, it's me, Mix Mercury, the Astro Himbo. And today we are looking at Donald Trump's solar returns as a way to see who's going to win the election. I want to start with his chart first, and then I want to do Kamala's charts on Sunday because her birthday is coming up, and so I think that would be interesting. Um, Trying to figure out how to get his charts online. So while y'all are filling in, while y'all are pulling up, give me just one moment to try and figure this out. Um, okay. see here. Documents. I know I should have did this before y'all got here, and I was trying, but I can only do so much without it actually being live. So I apologize. Natal charts. Okay, put all three of these. StreamYard is picky. I should have just did this on Zoom, honestly. Hey, Sam. Hey, Jada. Okay, let's see if I don't have slides. Can I just... come on. If this doesn't work, I'm just gonna not use StreamYard and go through Zoom, but I'm gonna try to do it on here first. They want me to do all of that? Oh my gosh. How long would it take to do Google Slides? Can I just like throw them on here? Yeah, just give me a moment while you guys show up. Import slides? Maybe. Oh, it won't let me do that either. This is so silly. Okay. How many of y'all are here? I got 3 of y'all here. Okay, I'm going to close this live and just do it through Zoom. It's just gonna make more sense, I fear. So y'all bear with me for just a moment. Let me try one more thing. Let me try one more thing. Maybe this. Maybe this. Let me try this. Hold on. Don't go nowhere. Don't go nowhere. Hold on. Oh. Well, okay, so it's sharing the screen. That just looks so silly to me, but what does it look like over here? Well, that might just have to do for today. Or do I want to put myself like this? I think I like that a little bit better. Okay, well, let's just do it this way. But I'm not gonna share it. Well, I guess I'll share my screen. I don't care. Let's get started. I ain't got all day. Well, thank you for being here. Hello, everybody. Hi, welcome in. Today, I already said an introduction, but I'll say another one. We are looking at Donald motherfucking Trump's chart, unfortunately. But the reason I wanted to do this was because me and my friend Nadine were talking about who's going to run the election. And I was like, I mean, I kind of feel like, full disclosure, I am biased. I'm very anti-Trump. Like, I personally feel like somebody who's not Trump, as far as the people who are running, could win. And, it wouldn't be the best, but it wouldn't be the worst. I think he's the worst. So that is my bias. I will throw that out there. I don't want this man to win. However, I'm going to do my best to read his chart objectively for today. Not here to convince anybody of anything political. I just want to know if the sky says this man might win or not, because I don't know. And then on Sunday, since Kamala's birthday is coming up on Sunday, then we'll read her chart and see. I think I like this one better. Then we're going to read her chart and see what her chart says about if she's going to win the election or not. So that's what's going on. Yeah, let's get into it. To start, so I'm starting with his regular birth chart just to kind of see what's going on in here. I haven't spent very much time looking at it at all. So this is all like I did not do any advanced preparation for this. I'm just here to talk off the top of my head. Where are my glasses? That's fine. No glasses today. I'm just here to talk off the top of my head and poke around in his charts and see what happens. So I have his natal chart, which is the one you're looking at now. I have his 2016 solar return since he won that election, and then he won that election, and then I have his 2024 solar return for this year to see what the commonalities are, what the differences are, and just like what can we potentially expect from his solar return in general uh moving forward. So that's what I'm talking about. So first thing we need to know, Trump is what, 70, what did I say he was? 78, I think. Yeah, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77. Yeah, 78, which means he is in a seventh house perfection year. The seventh house is the house of open enemies, first of all. It is the house of other people. It can be clients, contracts, sometimes legal issues, partners and partnerships, business partnerships, relationships with other people, spouses, all those types of things. Um, Maybe in the larger sense, you could think about the seventh house as like the shadow, but also maybe other people that you're working with or other people that you are navigating some kind of business relationship with. Seventh house is also related to partners' money, I think. Is that right? That might be the ninth house or the eighth house. I think the eighth house is partners' money. Um, Donald has Aquarius on the seventh house. And so Aquarius is the sign of self determination, it is a sign of erasure, and as a fixed sign, deals with authenticity and self preservation. Um, because it's in his seventh house, there's something about maybe feeling erased in conflict, maybe feeling like he doesn't see himself very well in conflict with other people or see what his part is in conflict with other people. There could be something about maybe his perception of reality being in conflict or contrast to how everybody else sees it. There's a few different ways we could look at that. But within the container of his whole chart, Aquarius is the only fixed sign that he doesn't have. So, like I said, fixed signs are about authenticity, self acceptance. They're also about self preservation and identity. So, his chart in general, he has Mars and Leo rising. So, Leo rising with Mars there. He's also got a Scorpio moon here in the fourth house, and he's got the sun up here in Taurus. He's also got the north node in Taurus and the south node in Scorpio. So fixed signs are his most dominant like task, if you will, or most dominant theme. His identity is a really big deal to him. That's something that he's navigating everywhere else in his life. And he's had narcissist allegations, which, kind of seem true to me. That is something that we could see, not for all Leo signs, but the sign Leo in general, if there were to be a placement that represented something to do with um, being self absorbed or egotistical or arrogant or hubristic, things like that. You would usually see that related to the sign Leo. Also, a sense of self centeredness and self consciousness um, and self awareness as well. So you could make the case to say that he thinks about himself a lot. We've kind of witnessed that. Uh, this is also coupled with the fact that he has the sun appear in the 10th house, conjunct the north node in Taurus. It's not on the midheaven, but the midheaven is up there as well. And sun in the 10th house, I mean, that also tends to mean that the sun is in the most elevated, maybe the strongest position of the chart, albeit not maybe in the strongest sign. Sun doesn't really love to be in the sign Taurus, but he was born at a full moon as well. The moon here opposite the sun in Scorpio, both of them opposite one another, says something about his mind, his intellect, the way that he sees himself is in direct conflict or contrast, maybe, to his body, his relationship to his body and his emotions. And then you have Mars and Leo here on the ascendant, kind of breaking up both of those. It gives the sun a little bit more influence because two Leo placements, and the moon, however, is still kind of competing for power in his chart because he's got two planets, Venus and Saturn, in Cancer, ruled by the moon. So this whole battle in his chart between the sun and the moon is like his whole life. It seems like his mother and his father, the way that he's seen by his father, wanting his father's approval, sun in Taurus, validation, all of that. And the reason I'm talking about all of these signs is because Aquarius is the one sign that he doesn't have. And this would be the sign that allows him to create an image of himself that he approves of, that he validates, that he feels confident within, rather than relying so much on everyone else's perspective. And that's kind of amplified by the fact that he has it in the seventh house, where maybe is not as concerned with how other people see him as he thinks. And at the same time, the reality being like, yeah, he does kind of really depend on being seen by other people in order to feel a sense of like self confidence and self esteem, right? This is also coupled by the fact that he has Mercury in Gemini. Mercury in Gemini in its own sign, this is also going to be one of his strongest placements because it is in domicile. It is also the ruler of his Jupiter placement. Um, because it's the ruler, or because it is in its own sign, and yeah, responsible for his Jupiter placement. Mercury has some power as well. This is his gift of gab. This is him being able to talk himself into and out of anything, and people either think it's funny or they think it's true or whatever. This, along with having Taurus placements and having this like charismatic Leo placement in the front, unfortunately does make him very, unfortunately to me because I'm biased, but does make him, an entertainer. He was on The Apprentice for however long, his own show, big entrepreneur. I'm sure he can work like an office or, an executive meeting or whatever he does as a businessman. I don't know. And doesn't necessarily have to be telling the truth, but the man can talk. And because of his other placements, Sun in the 10th house, Leo rising, people will listen. What I didn't expect to see today was him having the moon in Scorpio. I don't know, hadn't really thought about him as being a Scorpio, but I think this is interesting. I'm sure related to his relationship with his mother, especially being in the fourth house, which you may know after we talked about the fourth house yesterday, is the house of mother in traditional astrology and traditional Vedic astrology. And having it conjunct K2 as well, the south node, makes me think that, yeah, his relationship with his mother is kind of tumultuous. Like, I don't know a Scorpio moon who has a wonderful relationship with their mother. So, having these two placements in Cancer, both be Venus and Saturn in Cancer in the 12th house, makes me think about some estrangement, some alienation, just like a weird relationship with his mom where maybe he experienced some kind of emotional neglect. If it's not from his mom and we go with the idea that the fourth house represents the father, it could be that emotional neglect, humiliation, alienation, all of that kind of stuff from his dad. But it doesn't look like, he was his parents' favorite child. I don't know. So there's that. But all of that to say, I think that the main highlight, not highlight, but I guess the main thing that we're focusing on today is that he is in this, like I said, seventh house year ruled by Aquarius, which means he is in a Saturn profection. So when you're in a Saturn profection, I haven't had one in a very long time, so I can't use myself as an example, but when I've seen people experiencing Saturn perfections, they're usually bumping up against limits or restrictions or constraints in some kind of a way. That's just what Saturn does. It is very contracting, restricting, limiting in that sense. And it can sometimes get in the way of you doing just whatever you want to do all the time. You have to have some consideration for your physical and intellectual mental limits. You do have to sometimes work with what you've got, not really having access to excess as much. It can also look like really having to come to grips with reality in some kind of a way, or to experience, oh, well, I'll say it this way, maybe to create a different relationship with your own Saturn placement by living through the year, living through the Saturn perfection, depending on where Saturn is in the sky. So his Saturn placement, I'll start first, is in Cancer, like we said, here in the 12th house. So we have some overlays and themes between the 7th house and the 12th house for him. His 7th house connection is unstable. Okay. I'm keeping an eye on my connection maybe not being that great. Um so we have some overlays between the 7th house and the 12th house in this birthday year for him. We also have some overlays between Aquarius and Cancer. So I want to talk about the relationship between Aquarius and Cancer, and also the relationship between Cancer and Leo, since that's his first house. And that'll kind of orient us in this perfection year for him. His birthday was back in June, by the way. So we're, a little more than a quarter through this year for him. So Aquarius and Cancer, they have like a quincunx relationship. They are not exactly opposite. They're kind of like off to the side from each other in this way. And they don't really have much in common. They in fact struggle to see each other and struggle to relate. So this is talking about his body and his mind, in short, in both senses, his body and his mind in the air Saturn sense, and his body and his mind in the fire sun sense. Your body exists on Earth, and your body therefore has physical limits because it exists on Earth. You also have needs because you have a body. You also have feelings because you have a body. Aquarius is not really trying to do all that. Aquarius is more about the imagination, using the mind and the intellect and the perception or idea of ourselves in order to orient ourselves to the world around us. Whereas the body, again, just exists in a very literal physical sense. So with Aquarius, there's usually more the tendency to dissociate, to leave the body, to hang out in the mind and in the imagination, and not necessarily acknowledge what's going on internally. Same thing for Leo. Leo more about the mind in the conscious sense. So I would say Aquarius is a little bit more unconscious, a little bit less obvious a lot of times. As like self concept, and then self awareness in terms of how he consciously thinks about himself, how he sees himself, how he thinks other people see him. Also, in contrast with his actual physical body, because adjacent signs or a semi-sextile aspect, both of those things are kind of in conflict with each other as well. The main conflict, I guess, between Cancer and Leo is that I think Leo can think that they aren't getting their needs met because there's something wrong with them. I think this is true for all of the fixed signs to some degree. You could even say for his moon in Scorpio that he may have some kind of deep internal belief that he has to perform a certain way, or exaggerate his capabilities and his confidence a certain way, or whatever it is to get the recognition and validation that he needs. And then also having a tumultuous relationship with his own physical body, his own emotions, maybe even being out of touch with his own emotions, who knows. But being in his feelings is not what he would like to do. He would much rather tell himself something else is going on for him, or that there's something else he would rather pay attention to than his feelings, his bodies, and his emotions. However, because he's got two significant placements there, Venus and Saturn, both the benefic and the malefic of the night sect. If this were a night chart, those would be maybe a little bit louder planets, but they're kind of cast off into the closet. And this is very much a day heavy chart. So you could say that as far as him being in this Saturn year and having Saturn in Cancer, that the reality of his body is kind of haunting him this year. The reality of his needs, the reality of his emotions, and also maybe being ignorant of his body, his needs, and his emotions. Because how can you become aware of those things in yourself if someone else didn't nurture those things for you growing up, which again kind of talks about this relationship between his moon and these two Cancer placements. I will add that there may be a little bit of experiencing, like I said before, some sense of alienation or shame or um, pushback against his feelings, especially whenever he was younger. Invalidation of his feelings or being told that he's too sensitive or he's too much or whatever it is that makes him orient towards his body and his feelings in this way. So I would wonder if he were my client, I would ask him questions. He wouldn't answer them, but I would ask him questions about, what is his emotional awareness and his self attunement like? Like, what does he think about his own feelings? What does he think about his own body? Is he insecure? Is he confident? Um, is he in tune with his feelings, or is he just kind of like more up here and disregarding or ignoring what's going on beneath the surface? And if he were honest, he would say he doesn't really pay attention. But since he is who he is, he would tell us that he's passed all of his physicals and all of his tests. And so um, he is in good health and all of these things. It may not necessarily be the truth, but we would never know as the public because he wouldn't tell us. There's too much shame wrapped up in all of that, I would imagine. There's too much that would be in direct conflict with how he prefers to see himself and kind of would be in disagreement with how people interact with him as a Mars rising person. Um, I also have Mars and Leo. Unfortunately, he and I do have that in common. And yeah, I mean, I could understand if feeling limited by his physical body, and at the same time, kind of being a bully to his own physical body, with Mars being in the superior position to his moon, with reception, giving his Mars extra power for him to have this inflated sense of self, this inflated sense of what he's capable of, and overestimating his capabilities and influence, thinking he's basically invincible. So, because Saturn right now is in his seventh house, is his Lord of the Year in real time, the relationship between his Saturn and Saturn in real time is important because Saturn in real time, I would say, and in my experience of having also Saturn in Aquarius opposite Mars and Leo, is that he's kind of being humbled. Some of this is like, some of this is because like both the seventh house and the 12th house deal with enemies and like conflict and open conflict and hidden enemies. Like the man has had at this point 3 assassination attempts allegedly where he got somebody got shooters on him. Like it is not safe for this man this year, especially at this stage of the election. And some of that might be him constructing that or orchestrating that behind the scenes, and we as the public don't know. And that's his way of trying to alter our perception of him as maybe being stronger and invincible and almost godlike, or it could be him trying to alter our perception of the Democrats by blaming the Democrats for spewing all of this hate about him, spewing all of these different narratives about him and his capabilities as a leader and all of these different things. So that instead of us maybe focusing on too much about him and his safety and his, I don't know, his, what's it called? His what am I trying to say? Like his not his capabilities, but his like, I don't know, his ability to lead a country, basically. Instead of us focusing on that, he gets to put himself in the victim seat and then change our perception of the government, of, whatever it is. So um I could see Saturn in real time as kind of putting him in a position where he has to, I don't know, I feel like I'm projecting a little bit, but yeah, him having to confront his limits at the end of the day and like get into right relationship with what he's actually capable of. And if he doesn't, he keeps running up against that wall, pushing against that wall, and bad things happen. So I don't know. I want to pull up his Do I want to? I don't know. Maybe one more thing I have to say about that. Do I have anything else I want to say about that? Seventh house year. Yeah, other people, public facing, experiencing like parts of himself or seeing himself in other people for once. Yeah, Sam says he wants to be limitless. Yes. I mean, he does. It's kind of funny that shows up a little bit in his current solar return as well, which we'll get into, but he does want to be limitless. He wants to have all of the power. He wants to have all of the influence. He wants to do whatever he wants to do and nobody tell him what's what just because he sees himself as this type of an authority. So Saturn is kind of coming around to say, not too fast, not too fast. There are some other things that you need to be more concerned with right now. So it's not a coincidence, I'll say, that he's running for president. That's kind of reflected, I think, in his solar return chart, but we'll get to it here soon. Jada agrees. Yeah, she hates how funny his ass is sometimes. I mean, if he were to just stay in his lane and be an entertainer like he was supposed to be all of these years, then it'd be fine. But it's like when you try to be the president and like the ruler of one of the most quote powerful countries in the world, and then you're like doing all of this other stuff just because you're drunk off the power, like it stops being funny and it starts being like, hey, we kind of need somebody who knows what they're doing in office, not a celebrity slash entertainer. Oh, I need to go watch because I thought fourth house was father and paternal. I mean, it is. That's how I've seen it personally, but I was listening around to some Vedic astrologers yesterday talk about the fourth house being mother because its quote natural ruler is the moon and the sign Cancer. And so I was like, I guess that is true. I hadn't considered that before. And then when we were talking about it a little bit more, it did kind of make sense. But I do also still hold that fourth house can be father. So I just say fourth house is parents in general. And that's just me. Samajay says Saturn in Aquarius in relationship to his own Saturn looks like he has to face the reality of the people he stepped over to get his power to coddle himself. Ooh, I like that. That's a good one. Yeah. So, I wonder how his campaign employees feel. I think that's a good take, especially because he has Venus conjunct Saturn as well, like very closely conjunct too, 2 degrees with 0 degrees. Um, yeah, the sign Cancer having to do with coddling, having to do with like overindulgence or being indulged and being pacified. There are probably a lot of people who are having to pacify him regularly, who are having to coddle him and his very fragile ego regularly to keep him from flying off the handle when he doesn't get his way. And at the same time, like Samaje is saying, like, yeah, the reality of the people that he stepped over or also disregarded or ignored or whatever it is, dismissed, especially in his first term, like kind of pissing off the entire Republican Party. Not all of them. Obviously, he still has his MAGA, his MAGA people, his MAGA cult, but a lot of actual Republicans, and whether in office or out in the world, really didn't fuck with the way that he was representing them, which is another thing, actually, now that we're thinking about it, like the way that he, as a Leo rising, and even with Sun and Taurus, like being made the face of the Republican Party and having to confront the reality of that, the expectations that come with that, and the consequences basically of behaving any type of way without following the rules or expectations of the Republican Party, which doesn't seem like they have many at this point, but they have their own, standard of how they like to conduct things. And so if he is to go against the grain in that sense, or if he is to try and, I don't know, do things purely in his own way, meeting some resistance with that as well. But yeah, I like this about him facing the reality of people that he stepped over. Oh, do you mean his midheaven in Taurus makes you hate him sometimes? Because he really is too funny. Um, Ascendant in Leo, yeah, midheaven in Taurus. Yeah, he Unfortunately, he has that charm. He can do a little jingle, he can do a little song and dance and crack the people up, but whenever it comes to running a country, it's like, we don't love that. So, cool. Let's look at his solar return for this year. Well, I want to look at his solar return for 2016 first, just because that's the one that I want to. Oh, his ascendant ruler. Yeah, his ascendant ruler in Taurus. Absolutely. I want to look at his solar return from 2016 as far as like shifting the conversation into him winning or losing the current election, because that would have been the last time he had a chart that said he was going to win the election. I didn't study his chart back then. This was before I really got into astrology, so I'm looking at this again off the dome with fresh eyes. But let's see what it says. So in 2016 he would have turned 70. 70? Yeah, 70. 70 is an 11th house year. And so that would have been a year that he was in a Gemini perfection, 11th house year, with Mercury itself at home in Gemini as the Lord of the year. So basically, the 11th house has to do with audiences and fans and helpful people, mentors, benefactors. But especially, yeah, his audience, his fans, his cult, like all of that stuff. That would have been the year that he was in. And having Gemini there, like we said, is him kind of maybe being knowledgeable about his voter base, knowledgeable about it's wild to call that man knowledgeable, but but Finesser's got a finesse. He's been a businessman for a very long time. He kind of knows how to work the room and how to work people, and as he said, kind of say whatever he needs to say to get people to like him and to be on his side. You can also see this kind of confirmed with his Lord of the Year Mercury in Taurus, also being able to speak to people in a way that they like and that they receive him well and that they are drawn to him for whatever reason. It's also in the 10th house of his natal chart, but in the 11th house, Taurus. So his sun and his Mercury falling in the 11th house of the solar return, this outer circle. So being liked by his audience and his fans and like kind of creating a fan base based on identity, based on shared values, and based on like wanting to maintain the status quo, make America great again. Right. So having a catchy slogan in general to go along with that a lot of people resonated with in terms of like making a great America great again, meaning making America white again, as you know, Taurus having to do with not wanting to disrupt the status quo. So in that chart, he also had Taurus or his 12th house Cancer rising, which I think is interesting because, like I said, he's in a perfection now where his Lord of the Year is Saturn in Cancer. So we already see some of a similarity there. 12th house rising that year, I'm kind of fuzzy on like what that would have represented for him other than maybe like doing this unfamiliar job or uncommon job or being in a position doing something that he's never done before, and how that I don't know how that I don't know, learning this new role is something else that comes up, thinking about Gemini having to be knowledgeable and learn new information, but also having Mercury in Taurus in the solar return in his 10th house, like learning how to be a different kind of leader or learning how to be a different kind of just learning this new role and it being a people facing person oriented role, thinking about Cancer as well. uh Also meeting all of these other dictators and all of these other people uh that well, I guess that wouldn't have happened in 2016 per se. I don't know if he met up with anybody in 2017 before his next birthday. But yeah, just thinking about his 12th house rising and that like unfamiliar territory of being a president, maybe being part of it. And then the last part, um the other thing was that he had Saturn was in Scorpio at the time. So he had both Saturn and Mars, it looks like, transiting his moon back then, which is interesting, especially because now Saturn is in the square position from where it was at the last election. Jupiter was also in Leo in his first house back then. So Jupiter kind of maybe doing him some favors. Jupiter was also in a superior position from Saturn, as well as his Mars was in a superior position from Saturn and um, Mars and Scorpio. So remember, in his current year, Saturn is opposite his Mars. This year, his Mars would have been in the superior position to Saturn. So he kind of was able to get away with a little bit more back then, probably than he was now. And I don't know, something to do with Saturn on his moon as well, probably contributing to that. It's very wild to see. What else? What else? Chat, let me know if y'all see anything that y'all notice in this overlay. Uh the 11th house in the solar return 12th house, maybe some more of overlays between building an audience in an unfamiliar place or unfamiliar circumstance and having to learn what his base likes and wants to see from him and what gets reactions out of people. Thinking about having Cancer rising again, like how he can get a rise out of people, basically, to like be on his side and to listen to him. Hey HP, welcome in. I see you there. How he can get a rise out of his base or move them emotionally, being another way, so that they give him the praise and the accolades that he wants, and he gives them an illusion of getting their power back, even though that's not really what happened. It did in some ways. They were definitely emboldened in a lot of ways back then to take up space in the world again. You know, people who are racist, people who are fascist, people who are uh, anti-government and conspiracies and all of those types of things. He did embolden a whole base of people with his influence. So there's also that. What else is in this chart? I guess there's also this Moon Jupiter conjunction here in his second house. So that could look like him coming into a lot of money. That could look like all the money he raised on his campaign as well. It could also look like I'm thinking about deception also, like how that election was technically not legit. I'm pretty sure that was the case in 2016, right? Him versus Hillary, that he did cheat. Like there was a lot of foreign interference. Thinking about the 12th house again, a lot of foreign interference in the election, and the Russian, was there like something to do with Russian interference in the 2016 election and like propaganda and stuff like that. So I'm thinking about both his 12th house rising, but also this mutable stuff, both of those. HP says scrutiny and his innermost intentions being shown. So this is just for context for anyone who just entered. This is his 2016 solar return chart because that was the last time that he was elected, and we are comparing this one before I look at his current one to see if we see anything in common and what might denote him getting elected or losing this election cycle. So, but yeah, scrutiny and his innermost intentions being shown to his base. Um, Also, yes, the interference and his federal case. So yeah, just to be clear, this is his 2016 chart, not his current one. So I'm not sure about scrutiny of his intentions back then, although probably by the Republican Party, I would say, since that's the um since he didn't always identify as a Republican before he ran for president. I've seen in some interviews he identified as a liberal. So there's also this kind of like Trojan horse vibe with his 12th house rising and with having Mercury in Taurus, kind of like saying whatever he needs to say to whoever he needs to say it to in order to weasel his way into this position of power, and then not necessarily conform maybe to the group as much as they were expecting. Because again, he has Mars rising. Like there is no part of this man who wants to conform to anybody else. He wants people to conform to him or to get out of his way because he wants to do what he wants to do. So, yeah, and the reason why he changed to Republican and what he actually thought about them. Yeah, he was saying something about how he could shoot a man dead in the street and people would still vote for him. Like man does not give a fuck. So there was a lot of lies, there was a lot of deceit, a lot of misinformation back in 2016 that maybe allowed him to get in versus whatever's going on um, in his current one. Jim says North Node and Jupiter on his rising in Mars, like the whole world was watching him at that time. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jupiter and the North Node, like mind you, this was also when we were having that big solar eclipse that he went outside and looked up at the following year, having the nodes in his first and seventh house too, and him getting eclipsed into being the freaking president. Like, that's crazy. Uh, so yeah, stuff like that as well. And then there's also, you see Venus here in his perfected house, having Venus in Gemini. Again, another point for his audience and being liked by his base, being liked by a whole bunch of people who wanted to elect him because he wasn't a traditional politician. He made all of these promises that he was going to made all of these promises that he was going to, fulfill all of these wishes and do all of these different things that he didn't actually end up doing. But people saw themselves in him, which is, I think, another part of all of this, and kind of just took everything that he said at face value, like just went with whatever it was that he said. He said the right is not smart and he could easily take over the party. So the Republicans realized that's why he lost so much support. Yeah. So that I think is probably more stuff in his current chart. So let's pull that one up next. And maybe I'll switch back and forth as we're kind of talking about things. So this is his current solar return chart. And again, his chart is on the inside, solar return is on the outside. HP, I'm getting confused. Can you clarify, please? Because I don't remember. I was saying I don't have too much memory of everything that was going on back then because I wasn't as into technical astrology back then just yet. So I don't I don't remember too much. As far as like how I remember things, I usually remember things through astrology. And so um trying to like think in hindsight and relate stuff in his chart to like what was going on back then, I'm a little bit fuzzy on. Um the quote that you were talking about was from the earlier chart that he said that yeah, that he did say back then that Republicans aren't smart and that he could take over the party and that they, would kind of fall for anything. It's kind of making me think about Gemini as like gullibility as well. And so him kind of being able to manipulate that base basically in order to finesse his way into politics. And I see what you're saying, like his intentions not necessarily being very clear. Like I still don't know why this man really felt like he needed to run for president. And the fact that he was able to get in and win does say a lot about like his ability to be charismatic and influential, whether he knows like politics or not. That's not really the point. He knows how to be popular. He knows how to move a crowd. He knows how to emotionally manipulate people. So it's kind of what I can see that for his 2016 chart for sure. And that the conditions, what we're really saying is the conditions allowed it back then. Whereas now, today, with this chart that I just pulled up, his 2024 solar return for earlier this summer, 8 years have passed since then, and things are a little bit different. The political landscape is a little bit different. He lost his second election, which that actually should be a chart that I pull up too, is his um 2019 solar return chart since he lost that or 2020, his total 2020 solar return chart. So let me actually grab that real quick uh for a chart that he lost. So give me just one moment. Um 2020 Solar return. Let's compare that one. Because we don't just want to see if he would have won. We want to see what it would look like if he lost, too. Oh, did I save that in the right folder? Save that in the wrong folder. Okay. And then let me go over here. Hold on 1 second. Stop sharing. So y'all can't see my business just in case. 2020. All right. So his 2020 chart then, he would have been 74. 74, which 70, 71, 72, 73, 74. Wow, so he had Cancer rising again in his solar return chart in 2024 when he ran for president and lost to Joe Biden. So this time, I haven't seen this chart like at all. So we're all in this together, friends. So third house year, Venus ruled year, third house Libra year, perfection in 2024, meaning his Venus was his Lord of the Year. So we're back in the 12th house again. Lord of the Year in the 12th in Cancer, and Cancer was rising in his solar return. In this chart, we have Saturn was opposite his Lord of the Year, as well as Jupiter opposite his Lord of the Year. We also have Saturn and Jupiter in the 7th house of his solar return chart. The moon is in his natal 8th house, solar return 9th house. Mars is in his 7th house. I'm just listing off placements to orient myself in his chart. Venus, his Lord of the Year, is in the natal 10th house, but in the solar return 11th house in Taurus. So that's interesting because that would make me think, if that would make me think he would win just off the top of my head without looking at the rest of the chart. I would see Venus in the 12th and think like, oh, well, yeah, he probably would win that election because it's Venus in its own sign in the 10th house, his natal 10th house, but in the 11th house of the solar return. So like, why wouldn't you want a 10th house, 11th house overlay in an election year where your 10th house of like power and prominence and reputation and status is overlaid with your audience and benefactors and helpful people and all of that type of stuff, in a sign that Venus likes to be in, right? That would seem like a win, but we know that he lost this election. So that's interesting. Also, Mars opposite his Mars is just interesting to me, knowing how much power his Mars has. What else? What else? He was having his Mercury return during that birthday, so another kind of Mercury in the 11th house situation. But yeah, um, that's interesting. So I think the main points with his solar return chart are that he's in this third house perfection Libra year, so cardinal ruled year with cardinal signs having to do with power and control and power struggles, and being in a Venus year where his Venus is in the superior position to the sign Libra, yes, in Cancer, but dealing with this opposition from Saturn in Capricorn and Jupiter in Capricorn. It's also his own Saturn opposition too. So that just seems kind of like Saturn putting some limitations on his Venus, Saturn putting some limitations on his body, Saturn putting limitations on his likability, his some limits on his acceptance and approval from people, and again kind of being cast off into the 12th house. What else happened There are probably more things that happened in 2020. I don't want to get into all of that because I know it's already been like an hour. But yeah, that's interesting to me. And even like thinking about Venus in Taurus in this chart being trine Saturn and Jupiter, like that still would look to me like favorable in some kind of a way, but this is also in his natal sixth house. So I guess maybe he's dealing with or confronting the limitations of his work and job duties and obligations. Like back then, he couldn't keep up with it. Is that what was going on? I don't know. He was confronting like the reality of kind of like everything that he'd done up to that point and realizing that he's not really that capable at the job, or at least the people may be realizing that he wasn't very capable of doing this job. It was going to worsen the pandemic. It was going to um, worsen the economy. And a lot of people think that the economy was better under Trump. So that's kind of interesting to see in this chart. I don't know. I don't know. Mars in his seventh house in the solar return, but in the eighth house, I don't know. I don't know. Chat, what do y'all see? There's a lot of oppositions in this chart. I can say that much. Like he's got the moon opposite his natal Jupiter, Mars opposite Mars, Saturn opposite Saturn and Jupiter, Venus opposite Saturn and Jupiter, and then Venus and the sun opposite his natal moon. So his Mercury was getting caught up in this mutable stuff as well. I mean, I guess it's just his Mercury getting caught up when the moon in Pisces and that square, truths being revealed about him. I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting. I wouldn't have expected his chart to look that way and him losing. I wonder what else. I wish I could like manipulate this chart the way that I can in Astro Gold like I normally would to get more insight. But yeah, you're curious about Biden's 2022 solar return? Yeah, we could look at it too. Um, but I don't want to get sidetracked. But that does make me kind of wonder about Biden's chart as well. Because his also looked like he was going to step down this year. And that was a prediction that me and Nadine made. Less so about him directly and more just like the astrology of this year. So, what else do we have? Is there anything else I'm missing? There was also the nodes. Oh, yeah, I guess that's true. His Mercury was getting eclipsed during that time as well. I do remember that because my ascendant was getting eclipsed. That was very annoying. Very annoying time period. Okay, let me pull up his 2024 chart and let's get into that. So his solar return for this year, remember he's in a seventh house year at 78. Seventh house, Saturn in Aquarius perfection with Saturn itself in his seventh house. So again, dealing with limitations, limits of the mind, limits of the body, limits of the imagination, and also the process of self-determination and self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-concept. There could be a way that maybe how he thinks about how he thinks about himself in his head, he has to deal with what that looks like manifesting in reality. So there's that. Saturn ruled year doesn't necessarily give that, like I said in the beginning, you can just do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. You have to confront reality in some kind of a way. I need to think about a different way to say this, but dealing with the limitations of his own mind too um, is another part of this. I know he's had at least one COVID infection. I'm not sure how many other ones. He's also just getting older. He's been shot at 3 times. At this point, he might be dealing with some level of PTSD, even though he doesn't want to admit it to us. And but you see in this solar return, he actually has Leo rising. So first house is rising. in the solar return, which kind of leaves all of these placements where they are. And all of the overlaps are consistent with his regular natal chart. So that's interesting. Something that we haven't seen so far. He had Cancer rising with those first two charts that we looked at, election charts that we looked at. This time he's got the first house rising with the sun in the 12th house. So again, immediately that would kind of seem like, oh, like he is going to be very visible again, um, kind of rising up into public perception for whatever reason. And with Mercury and Jupiter there, very much amplified, very much doing a lot of talking, public speaking, public facing stuff, dealing with other government officials. If you're looking at Jupiter, dealing with other people in some kind of a way, especially in a seventh house year, dealing with other people, dealing with the masses in some kind of a way. But again, his 12th house, his seventh house ruler is in the 12th. So he's in the 12th house again this year, kind of like he was in 2020. His Lord of the Year was in the 12th house then too, with the ascendant ruler this time being in the 10th. He does have Venus in the 11th house again as well. So I guess it makes sense that he is running and that he is one of the finalists, the Republican uh president elect. Right? Is that what it's called? Run whatever. He's running. He was chosen to run for the Republicans again. So that's probably what a lot of that is. Now the question of will he win is really what we're here to see. I don't know. Oh, excuse me. I'm getting tired. I don't know. This is tricky because yes, like Jim is saying, he does have Saturn opposite his natal Mars, which is tricky. It is difficult. Different from where he different from when he had Mars in Aquarius. Yeah, Mars wasn't really beefing with Saturn. His own Mars was in a weird relationship with Saturn. Um in the 2020 election as well, but in the election that he won, like we said, his Mars was in the superior position to Saturn. So Saturn couldn't hold him back then. But this time he's in a bit of a power struggle with Saturn. So yeah, I think Mars opposite his Saturn is part of it, especially because he's in a Saturn ruled year. That might not matter as much in other years. Uh, but something that's also interesting is Mars in the solar return ninth house is on the midheaven and in a trine with his Mars placement, and it's Mars and Aries at that. So strong cardinal influence from this chart, and that probably is him again, like dealing with these internal power struggles with the Republican Party or dealing with power struggles with the media, ninth house, dealing with just trying to do whatever he wants to do within the government. And in this chart, not necessarily meeting too much resistance in that. There aren't any other cardinal placements in this chart. That is the only cardinal placement that he has running aside from his own cardinal placements being in Cancer. So that's also kind of interesting. Mars is square his natal Saturn, but Mars in the solar return is in the superior position to his Saturn this time. So I wonder how much that looks like him disregarding his body and therefore exhausting himself. Jim said at the same time, Mars and Aries trinatal Mars and Leo is exhausting. Yeah, running that man ragged for sure. Got him out here on the campaign trail constantly, regardless of maybe how he personally feels about that energetically. Also having Mars and Aries square his natal Venus too. So Mars and Cancer together, like there is that experience of like the neediness and the immediacy or urgency of getting needs met is stronger, but at the same time a bit reckless. It is a bit like we just have to do something to deal with the feelings of neglect or discomfort or whatever it is. So I don't know how much of that is like I don't know how much money he's received. He does have the moon in the second house of this chart again, which he had Which chart was that he had that in? The 2016 chart or the 2020? Yeah, the 2016 chart. So that was him getting money again. He did have it in the 8th house in the other chart, so he didn't necessarily win, but still maybe receiving campaign money. So those things are in common. What else? So there's also Moon opposite Jupiter, his natal moon opposite Jupiter in real time. And as much as Jupiter in the 10th of a solar return chart, especially when you have natal planets there, could seem favorable, sometimes I think Jupiter is a villain. Where was Jupiter in his other chart? It was in his first house, right? Yeah. But tied up in these squares with Mars, and Jupiter was tied up a little bit more in some other stuff going on, but I don't know, he was in a Mercury perfection, so Jupiter was supporting his Lord of the Year, and then in a square where his Lord of the Year was winning over Jupiter, whereas now his Lord of the Year, well, his Lord of the Year is in the superior position to Jupiter in the 10th, so there's that, but it's in the 7th house that could be open conflict, so that may not necessarily be a good thing. Um, it may not be a good thing, it may not be a bad thing. I kind of feel like it's not a good thing just because Saturn in the 7th dealing with conflict, like open conflict with other people, and the assassination attempts, like you do have to be kind of public facing and out and exposed in order to have people shooting at you in the first place. And as well as having these oppositions to his moon, these 3 Taurus oppositions to his moon, that kind of makes me feel like yeah, he's realizing some places where he doesn't really fit in anymore. I mean, it's not to say that he doesn't have a ton of support in the campaign right now. Obviously, like they keep saying that the race is close. So he must be doing something right. He is appealing to the looming threat of fascism and white supremacy and the rise of or not the rise, but kind of the maintenance of patriarchy and all of those types of things in the current context. But again, Saturn in Aquarius is kind of also trying to break all of that up. So yeah, I think maybe if he wasn't in a Saturn year, like if he were in, I don't know what year he would need to be in for that to play out more in his favor, maybe a Mars year. Um, I don't know, but because he's in a Saturn year, I don't know. I don't feel like I think because he's in a Saturn year and he has Saturn in the 12th house, that just doesn't give president to me. And his 12th house is actually in the 12th house this time too. It's not in the first house of the solar return. It's in the 12th house of the solar return as well. That was the original thing that kind of made me think he wasn't going to win when Kamala first stepped up. And we will be reviewing Kamala's chart on Sunday, like I said, on her birthday for her solar return. So the contrast there might kind of make things look a little bit differently as we're looking at it now. But yeah, man, I'm also just realizing like how much harder solar returns are to read whenever you don't have the person to actually like interview about their placements and talk to directly about their placements. Like I'm having to make up stuff in my head or go off of things that I've seen. And to be honest, I don't pay attention to this man that much. So I just know that in terms of him running, like, yeah, he got humiliated in front of a whole bunch of people, and he's still humiliated in front of a whole bunch of people in the last, what's it called? In the last debate, and that he's running against a woman and spreading a lot of misinformation like he always does. Moon in Virgo, and the nodes in Virgo as well. I wonder with the South Node in his second house, since South Node is usually where we experience losses or clearing out of some sort and like past karmas and things like that, if that has anything to do with him losing money as a result of all of this. But then the North Node in the 8th house, like, is he gonna die? Now, just because the North Node is transiting your eighth house doesn't necessarily mean you're going to die, but I'm just throwing that out there. Because that, at the same time, those eclipses could look like, making gains in some kind of a way, having access to other people's money, donations, all that type of stuff too. But there's no actual planets there. Planets are in the second house. So sometimes that also looks like spending more money than making money. And like I said, with the South Node, they're losing money as well. Hmm. What else? What else? I think as far as him winning, what I would want to see in a chart that has him winning is like stronger 10th house, 11th house stuff since that's what worked for him the first time. Saturn does throw a wrench in his plans a little bit and puts his moon in a situation where him alienating himself from him alienating himself from his base, but also from the Republican Party and also from the government at large. Him also having a felony, a conviction, being a convicted felon as 12th house themes too. 12th house having to do with prisons, and just him being older, him being an older man. In contrast, like that's another thing with this being a seventh house year and him having to see himself in relationship or in contrast to other people, like him running against a woman who's at least she's about to be 60 on Sunday. So someone 18 years younger than him and how that makes him have to see himself as someone who's a little bit older, whether he wants to see and acknowledge that or not. The rest of us can see it. The rest of us are confronting that as well, like him being a little bit older, his health not necessarily being that great. I mean, I don't think it's terrible per se, but his mind and all of the stress of just running in this campaign at 78 versus 70 the first time that he did it. Again, confronting the limits of the mind and the body with Saturn and him having Saturn in Cancer. I don't know. That just doesn't seem great. Mars in the superior position to his Saturn doesn't seem great. And honestly, like Jupiter, as much as we think Jupiter is a good guy, sometimes Jupiter is a bad guy too. Sometimes he is. And having Jupiter opposite your moon, that's not a comfortable transit either. That can sometimes feel really like, I'll use the word manic, but it can feel very like just kind of running yourself ragged and kind of overestimating your limits at times and overestimating yourself. It's also just dealing with a lot of ping ponging back and forth emotions and temper tantrums and things like that. So who knows what his immediate like campaign people are having to deal with running with him. I don't know. I don't know if I have anything else new to say. I don't know if I have anything else new to say other than something I've already said. I'm kind of locked into a tunnel vision about his chart. And this is a cold read, so I really didn't do too much thinking about it. Maybe the only other thing about the solar return chart that I haven't said is that it's also a fixed dominant chart. So his identity as a rich white man, being part of him having to see himself as that and how much power he has and how much he can rile up his base to identify with him and say, like, rich white men deserve to stay in power or, whatever that mentality is. But the landscape currently being, again, Saturn in Aquarius, square Jupiter and Taurus, is that a lot of those things are kind of changing. I mean, the fascism piece isn't changing. That still seems like that's what we're dealing with, regardless of who wins. But as far as identity being a big piece of this election and identity being a big part of just the collective consciousness right now, it's not a very favorable time to be a rich white man, maybe like it was back in 2016, where I think that was also a fixed dominant chart, but at the time his Leo stuff had more power, more influence. Yeah, that was also a fixed dominant chart. So not the best time. The context back then was rich white men, right? Jupiter and Leo. So the context now is a little bit different. And it is, oops, it is still, trying to say that it's not to say that rich white men or, class and whiteness are still running the scene. It's just again they have a little bit of pushback from Saturn and Aquarius. So I don't know. I'm leaning a lot into Saturn and Aquarius just because I also know what Kamala's chart looks like, and hers in general is a little bit more favorable for this particular climate, astrological climate. So there's also that. I'll bring his back up maybe to compare to hers whenever we talk about hers, and y'all will kind of see what I mean. But yeah, I don't know. I don't see it for him just because his Lord of the Year is in the 12th. Like if I base it off of one thing, it would be that. Um Last time he won his Lord of the Year was in the 11th. And last time he's lost, his Lord of the Year was in the 12th. So if I stuck with that pattern and based it off of that, and also just the perfection years that he was in were different than the 7th house and Saturn in particular being the ruler, yeah. But, it's not all bad because he did still make it to the final two. He did still make it to the general election. Just I don't know that I see that as him winning. Now, we could make a case for some other things that might happen as a result of him losing the election, at least the general election part. And I know that there's rumors of him not wanting to certify the election and rumors of him not wanting to give up power, even though he's not technically having it right now. But as far as like, do I think the electoral college will vote him in? I don't know. I have a theory, a hunch, that the government elected officials are not trying to let him see office again, and that might be part of the reason why Kamala is running such like a bipartisan campaign. That they're kind of like, look, we don't want Trump again because we're scared. He don't listen to us, and we're not trying to be under his authoritarian regime again. But if we're going to elect you, then you need to do something that's going to benefit all of us. So that could be that. I think there's a strong case for that in Kamala's chart, but we're not talking about her today. So yeah, this kind of looks like Trump wants to do what Trump wants to do, and I don't know if the government necessarily supports that this time. I would even say that they know that Trump is harder to manipulate than Kamala. Kamala's a little bit easier to manipulate than Trump. So I don't know. I think that's all I'm going to say about his chart. I don't know if anybody else has any input or questions or comments or what you guys think if any of this went over your head, because I was really just talking off the top of my head without making that super easy for you guys to understand. So I apologize for that. I'll plan a little bit better next time I do a public chart. I'll plan maybe hers a little bit better. I just hate talking about this guy. So I told y'all my biases in the beginning. Um, as much as I don't want that to influence the way that I read his chart, inevitably it's going to. So, take all of this with a grain of salt. I try to do my best to just point out certain dynamics astrologically that seem favorable or unfavorable, more than actually like trying to get a read on him as much. But I think I also kind of did that. So I don't know, a little bit more of a technical live today, but I don't know. Saturn, my Lord and Savior, just seems like he's trying to humble him again. And who knows if he'll even live to tell the tale. You know what I mean? And that's not me inciting anything. This is just for entertainment purposes only. I'm just an astrologer for, the feds and the YouTubers who might be listening. I don't care what happens to that man. I'm not involved. I stay at home in my house and mind my business. But kind of don't want to see your ruler be Saturn in the 12th in a year where you're super public facing. I don't know. He need to go sit down somewhere. If his moon has its way dealing with Saturn, his moon is like, I don't think we need to be up here actually. I think we need to go sit down somewhere and hide. I think we need to go take a break, drink some Diet Coke, and hang out on the golf course like he would rather do. Because it's either that or it's jail or it's something else. So I'm going to stop because I'm tired and I need to rest before my appointment later today. So thank y'all so much to everyone who tuned in. If you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to my channel so you can be notified whenever I do my daily lives, and follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you haven't already so you can get updates about when I'm scheduling lives or what the topic might be, or if you want to suggest a topic, I'm always open to that as well. um I think that's it. I hope y'all have a wonderful day, and thanks again for joining me. Okay, bye. Cue music.